Welcome to another presentation of Frankly Speaking Sports Interview. Tonight, the former reporter of SNY and Major League Baseball who covered the New York Mets will be joining us live. Want to remind you all that all of these interviews, future and present, could be found on YouTube at Frankly Speaking Sports. Make sure to join, subscribe to us. It is free. That's YouTube, Frankly Speaking Sports. Earlier today, we had the pleasure of talking to Michael Barron. Like I said, he covered the New York Mets, and we talked about certain topics such as baseball, what's going to happen here in the near future, and we also talked about the New York Mets and the upcoming season. So as we are about to go to listen to the interview today, want to remind you all that you can also join us again tomorrow when we'll have another interview with the great Peter Burns, who covers the SEC network. So let's go ahead, let's roll it, and let's listen to the great Michael Barron. To you. A gentleman who has written for SNY, for Major League Baseball. He covered the New York Mets. Let's welcome Michael Barron. Michael, how you doing today?
Doing all right. Everybody's staying safe. How about yourself?
We're doing good down here as well. Michael, the last couple of days, at least around Major League Baseball, I know especially in the state of Florida, some of the facilities, the home facilities are opening up, like the Tampa Bay Rays, the Miami Marlins, to do some of these, workouts with a limited number of people. And then you get Major League Baseball, playing these games, it seems like with between the players and the owners about getting the season started. And just when fans are excited to see baseball, seems like these two sides are doing everything to tarnish the game. What is your perspective on what's going on right now between the commissioner's office and the players? And, from a fan's perspective, also from a writer's perspective, it's got to be pissing you off a little bit.
Well, it's not really a surprise why you're seeing the squabbling and this, general disagreement about everything. I mean, for a number of years now, neither the league office or the Players Association have been able to even agree on the color of the sky. So, it stands to reason that this would be a difficult at best negotiation, which is for what really is a mini collective bargaining agreement for the 2020 season, right? They're discussing player salaries, they're discussing player conditions, they're discussing what the league can do, what the players can do, what the league can't do, and so on and so forth. It's really, when you dumb it all down, not a mini CBA negotiation, but also really kind of like a sneak preview of what the league and the players are up against after 2021, which is when the current CBA, the real CBA, expires. I think that one of the key issues between the league and the players right now is that the league hasn't really been able to address the player safety concerns, which is really what a lot of what they care about, and it's an understandable concern. I laid out the scenario yesterday or the day before of, just think about it on these simple terms. The pitcher pitches the ball to the catcher throws the ball back to the pitcher, then the pitcher wipes his brow, wipes his nose, goes to his mouth like they always do pretty much on every pitch or on every other pitch, and then takes the ball and throws it back to the catcher, who then touches the ball again. So you cause a potential spread just in that one little scenario. Now, MLB will tell the players, well, we're going to test the players constantly, and we're going to do everything we can, and blah 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 blah, to create a safe and comfortable environment for the players. But that's not necessarily possible when you think about just the little nuances of the game, and how just touching the baseball can cause a spread to any number of players on the field, even after the hitter makes contact and hits the ball to somebody, and someone's got to touch the ball, right? So, this is a lot of what the players are really concerned of, and also, of course, like what happens when a player inevitably tests positive. What's going to happen to that player? What's going to happen to that clubhouse? What's going to happen to the other team? And Rob Manfred has only said that, well, if one player gets it, that doesn't shut down the league. And that's probably not true, because if someone gets it, that means an entire clubhouse has to go into isolation for 14 days, and not to mention what happens with the other teams. So you potentially lose two teams in this realigned and really unfamiliar version of Major League Baseball. And I think that those are, aside from the player salary issue, which is legitimate, but difficult for us folks who don't make, millions and millions of dollars to relate to or even tolerate. And I understand that side of it as well. It's a tone-deaf argument between millionaires and billionaires. But when you put all that together, it's really difficult for the two sides to come together, which has left a lot of skepticism, despite some of the public optimism, that you see that games will be played this year. It leads to a lot of skepticism that if they do play, that it's sustainable. And I think that's really just a pragmatic view, just from what we all know about the disease. The disease doesn't care about how much money you have, what political party you are, whether you're a Major League Baseball player, an NFL player, an NBA player. It doesn't distinguish between any of that. If you catch it, you can be affected regardless of your demographic. So, this is what a lot of the players are worried about, and why you're hearing a lot of prominent players are willing to sit out the season and surrender their salary, just because they want to keep themselves safe. They want to keep their families safe. We've seen what this can do, even to young people, and these are all young people. So, I think that's the long and short of, what you're seeing. I know there are other nuances and details which, are microcosms of the grand disagreement. So we just have to see what happens. This is, the relationship at its foundation is not great to begin with, and that makes this all pretty hard to see a positive conclusion with. So we'll just have to see what happens.
Now, they came out, Michael, with this 67-page safety protocol. And, maybe I think differently than other people, but if you need to have 67 typed pages of safety protocols, in my opinion, that is the same thing as saying it's not safe to play baseball.
Well, perhaps, but also you have to remember, on both sides, in the Players Association and the league, these are legally written and CYA'd documents. So, there's, from our perspective, we got our hands on the document, on this 67-page document. 5 of the pages may be relevant to us. So, I wouldn't read too much into the length of it, but I do agree that, I think of it as a player, really. What am I faced with? I think of it as a regular person when I go to the grocery store, when I have to walk my dog, or I'm out for a walk with my wife, or I'm bike riding with my kid, and I pass somebody. There are assumed risks that you take when you leave your house. Now, put these people in a confined space in a clubhouse where they're sharing showers and they're not going to be allowed to shower, which is disgusting. That creates its own hygiene problem. How do you spread people out in the clubhouse? These are all things that MLB must address, and it must be a uniform process for all 30 clubs. It's easy to say, okay, well, we'll realign so you don't have to fly anywhere. Well, we'll change the rules so the umpires have to wear a mask, or the pitcher can't go to his mouth. But, the weather and the conditions in the stadium dictate the behavior of the players in large measure. This isn't, the conditions are not equal from city to city, from stadium to stadium. The wind, the rain, the sun, the humidity, all can play a role in whether or not you go to your hands or your face, or you end up touching something in the clubhouse to make yourself feel good. You understand that just as human beings.
Right.
These are difficult things to overcome. Now, the flip side of the argument, of course, is that in Korea, this is all working. And yeah, I mean, they haven't had to shut down their league. It's weird with no fans in the stadium, but I think, all things being equal, people can deal with it as long as baseball is being played. The difference between Korea and the United States, as we all know, is that the scale of the problem is different here than it is there. They had an immediate containment / mitigation strategy at the beginning, which was harsh and and much more draconian than what we have in this country. Our stay-at-home order was, please stay at home. In South Korea, it was, you're staying at home. Big difference. So in terms of the scale, it's much more out of control here. So the question is, if there is an outbreak in Major League Baseball, how do you isolate that outbreak and keep everybody else safe? And I think that those are going to be difficult questions to answer.
Now, Michael, going on to other sports-related material, talking about the New York Mets, and I know you covered the New York Mets for a while now. What was it like watching Pete Alonso's rookie year last year?
I mean, it was surreal to see, a player burst onto the scene and not just hit the way he did and put on the show that he did, from the beginning of the year to the end, and what he did in the All-Star game, but for a guy to be able to burst on the scene like that and immediately, what's the word I'm looking for? He created his own aura right from the beginning, and it's very rare to see that just in a personality in sports, especially in New York, where they can come in, immediately make a huge impact to the roster and to the clubhouse and to the fan base and to the city, but also be able to sort of pick up and carry a team on his shoulders the way he did. And he was able to do that for stretches at a time. And he's a very unique personality as well, which I think makes him even more of a special athlete in this country. Obviously we've never seen anything like it from a statistical perspective. He shattered, the home run record. And he seemed like he did it with ease. He didn't really struggle to hit home runs last year. But I think this is a guy. Should he be able to sustain a high level this high level performance, combine that with his personality, and what he brings to the game itself. Like, this is a guy you build your not just a roster around, but your brand around, and I think that's what makes him truly special and truly important to not just the Mets but the city itself.
Now, this will be, and you've heard this in sports just as much as I've heard, about the sophomore jinx. Do you think Alonso, now pitchers are going to obviously have a lot more data on him with the analytics in the game and everything. Do you think he can keep this up?
Well, no player in history has been able to hit 50 home runs a year for his entire career. So the answer to the question is probably not. Having said that, like I said before, it's more about, I think if he can improve other areas of his game, plate discipline when he's slumping especially, I think he does a really good job of spraying the ball to center and left, so he's not really a one-dimensional hitter. But I think being able to, mitigate his batting slumps by staying out, keeping himself from swinging at pitches outside the zone at the rate he did when he was slumping, will only help him become a more well-rounded player. And, maybe, he's not going to hit 50 home runs a year, but, if he can give you 35 to 40 with a little bit higher on-base percentage, a little bit, I know batting average has become overrated, but you'd like to see that contact rate go up in some cases, and his ability to get on base. I think that will be ultimately more important than, how many home runs he can hit. If he can hit a ton of home runs, but also have, a 400 on base, like, you're talking about an unstoppable force at the plate, So, I think that's how he will be able to mitigate the sophomore slump. You heard him talk about a lot of these things during spring training because, I'm sure it's in the back of his mind, like, now the expectations are high, now everyone's going to think he's a 50 home run threat every year, and he is, but he's not going to hit 50 home runs a year. He's not going to play 100% healthy, all the time. So how does he remain an impact player, when those conditions, when he's facing those conditions? And I think, he understands that. That's part of what makes him special. That's part of what makes him more mature than the years of service would suggest. And, it's about putting it into practice, of course, but, I think we're all excited to see him actually do that. What happens when, he doesn't hit 50 home runs? What does his game look like? And, it's part of a player's story. The great ones are able to overcome, the sophomore slump. The great ones are able to sustain this for 15 years. Albert Pujols being one of them. He's not what he was before, but he's really, to me, the example of, one of the truly great hitters, of our generation, because, he was, he could beat you with the home run. He could beat you with a walk. He could beat you, by hitting the ball to right field. And that's, I think, the kind of player that Pete Alonso would strive to be, a guy who can beat you in any number of ways, not just by hitting a home run, So we'll see what happens. I mean, he's a great player and a great person, and I think that, this is someone the Mets, this is, as I always say, there are very few keepers that you can immediately define, and I think Pete Alonso was one of those rare keepers.
We're talking to Michael Barron. He wrote for SNY and for Major League Baseball, and he covered the New York Mets. A couple more quick questions for you. Looking at this team, let's say they do play in 2020. Obviously, Noah Syndergaard going down is a loss for the Mets, but if you look at this team on paper, you still have a good, solid starting five with Stroman, Watka, Porcello, Matz, DeGrom. You got a great bullpen, and you got a lot of great young guys in Conforto, McNeil, obviously Alonso, Nemo, and so on and so on. What is your projection if they do play this year? Because, for me looking at it, I think they can be a very competitive team.
Yeah, look, I mean, the problem with a shortened season, especially as time goes on with no resolution, the number of games they're just going to get more and more reduced. The problem with a smaller schedule is that you're not afforded, a 10-game stretch where you can, be getting a run, getting a slump. A 3-7 can be brutal on your ability to make the playoffs. So, and that's when there are the offenses which aren't as well rounded as others to me, can really suffer consequences because, like I said, if you go 10 or 12 games where you're averaging 3 runs, which happens to most teams, that can kill your season if they're only going to play, 80 games or 60 games or 50 games or whatever it's ultimately going to be. So I don't know if the shortened season helps the Mets as much as it may hurt them. I think for a team like the Yankees, it's a little bit different story because they're in, there's no question they're, a cut above the Mets, even as good as we think the Mets can be. The Yankees just have a more complete roster, a deeper lineup, a better bullpen, and they can, they can mitigate the slumps because they can beat you in more ways than the Mets can. So, I don't know how the shortened season might help them. I mean, in terms of Noah Syndergaard, he's out at least, from March to March. So the fewer games you play without him, the better off you are because he's, despite his struggles last year, and you don't know whether that was tied to a potential elbow problem. I think the fewer games you miss with that pitcher, that kind of pitcher, the better off you are, just from as far as the season goes. But yes, you're right. I mean, the pitching is still a strength, albeit it looks a little bit different than it did a year ago without Wheeler and Syndergaard. But they're gonna anything that happens, they're gonna live and die by the starting pitching and the bullpen because this is a team. As we all know, last year they couldn't win games close and late. They would because of the bullpen, because the offense would struggle at times. They didn't support the starting pitcher. So they're gonna rest all their hope on a 13-man pitching staff, and I think Brody is going to have to get creative, with the new roster rules, and the new rules in game, and how he manages that pitching staff from day to day with the roster maneuverability and making sure there are fresh arms and making sure you keep the starting pitchers healthy with a different, you're going to now have a new spring training, a shortened spring training. But that's the thing. Remember, like, all the pitchers have to start from scratch again, and whatever happens, it's going to be an accelerated spring training in strange conditions in the summertime. If they're in Florida, especially, it's going to be hotter and more humid, and it's going to be difficult. But this is a good roster, and you have good chemistry, and whenever you have both of those, I think it's a recipe for success. And I think Brody's done a great job working, humanizing this clubhouse a little bit more than it has been in the past, and that's a credit to his roster building, despite some of the bad moves that he's made. So I think they're still in good shape, but. Like I said, I think, there's still holes on the roster, which I think get more and more difficult to address with a shortened season.
Now, before I let you go, been hearing a lot of stuff within the media about the Mets and them being up for sale. What's the latest news on that?
There isn't a lot of news. I mean, you've seen, A-Rod enter and exit the fray. Just from a media perspective, I mean, the Wilpons and really the league have kept those cards close to the vest. And, so it's difficult to say if there's been any traction. I mean, look, I think the economy and the markets and, people's wealth especially have been greatly and adversely affected over the last 2 months or 3 months, really. This all started really in February. So, I don't personally know if you're going to see any traction with, the sale of the club until, there's some sort of momentum with, the season, and I think a lot of that has to do with the personal investor uncertainty, and fear, but also this is all affecting the valuation of the club, so, it ultimately becomes a buyer's market when it comes to a professional sports sale right now, because revenues are down, which means, any profits or any profits are down, and any losses are up. So that can certainly influence the value of a club and the sale of a club. So I don't know that you're going to see anything like that until, later this year. But I can tell you, just based on reports and in, sniffing and listening around the club, is that they are motivated to sell. I mean, I think we all know that anyway. So I think something will happen. It's just a matter of when.
All right. Well, Michael, I want to thank you so much for taking some time with us today to be on Frankly Speaking Sports. I really, really appreciate it, and stay safe, my friend.
You too, and thanks for having me. Had a good time.
All right. Thank you, sir. That was the great Michael Barron, the reporter from SNY, Major League Baseball, who used to cover the New York Mets. Want to remind you all, if you enjoyed that presentation, that interview, you can go ahead to our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is called Frankly Speaking Sports. It has all the past interviews we have done with such great guests like Michael Barron. Also, we will put all future interviews on that channel on YouTube. Want to also remind you, if you are from another group and are not a member of Frankly Speaking Sports, go ahead and join us on Facebook. We put all our podcasts, all our interviews, and we update you with the latest information. Both of those channels, the Facebook page and the YouTube page, are free. Want to thank you all for enjoying another episode of Frankly Speaking Sports Interviews. Have a great night.